When we pause for a moment and really look at our lives, we notice something curious. Even in times when things seem to be going well, there's still an underlying feeling that something is missing. We chase after success, comfort, and relationships, yet the satisfaction we get never seems to last. It's as if life keeps slipping through our fingers, no matter how tightly we try to hold on. This is not a flaw in us personally. It's something built into the very nature of human existence. Over 2,000 years ago, the Buddha set out to understand this restlessness at the heart of life, and what he discovered was a clear and practical explanation of why we suffer, and more importantly, how we can be free from that suffering. One of the most profound ways he described human experience was through what he called the five aggregates. These are 5 categories that together make up what we think of as ourselves. Everything we are, our body, our feelings, our thoughts, our memories, our awareness, all of it can be understood through these 5 parts. At first, this might sound a bit abstract, but when we start to see how they work in our daily lives, something amazing happens. We begin to realize that what we call me is not a fixed thing at all, but a changing process. The Buddha taught that by closely observing these 5 aspects, we can uncover a truth that completely changes how we relate to our own mind and body. Instead of being trapped by them, we can see them for what they are, temporary, changing, and not truly under our control. And this insight isn't just philosophy. It is meant to be lived, to be experienced directly, in the middle of ordinary life. In this video, we'll take a deep dive into each of the 5 aggregates, explore why they are linked to suffering, and learn how understanding them can open the door to a peace that doesn't depend on anything outside ourselves. To understand why the 5 aggregates were taught, it helps to go back to the time of the Buddha himself. More than 2,500 years ago in ancient India, there were many teachers and philosophies offering answers about life, death, and the nature of the self. Some believed in an eternal soul that would live on forever. Others believed that everything ended at death and nothing remained. The Buddha, however, approached the question differently. Rather than building a theory based on speculation, he encouraged looking directly at human experience in the present moment. He wanted to know, not from books or debate, but from direct observation, what is this thing we call self, and why does it bring so much trouble? After his awakening, the Buddha gave his very first teaching on the 4 Noble Truths, explaining the reality of suffering, its cause, its end, and the path leading to that end. Soon after, he spoke again to a small group of followers, explaining the nature of the self in a very practical way. He pointed out that what we call I or me is not a single unchanging essence. Instead, it is made up of different processes that arise and pass away. These processes are the 5 aggregates. He explained that when we cling to any of them as being who we are, we create suffering for ourselves because they are all subject to change. The beauty of this approach is that it does not require anyone to accept a belief blindly. You don't have to sign up for a doctrine or memorize a set of dogmas. The Buddha's invitation was simple. Observe your own mind and body, see the truth for yourself, and notice how attachment works. His teachings were not meant only for monks living in forests. They were for anyone who wanted to live with greater clarity and less pain. The early Buddhist community preserved these teachings carefully, passing them down through generations by memorizing and reciting them. These early records give us a window into what the Buddha emphasized most. And when we read or hear these words today, we find that they are not locked in the past. They speak directly to the problems of our time. The anxiety, the constant search for identity, the fear of loss, the endless craving for more. In every era, the human heart struggles with the same questions. Who am I? Can I find lasting happiness? The teaching on the 5 aggregates is the Buddha's direct answer to those questions, showing us that freedom begins with understanding the nature of what we call a person, and seeing clearly that none of it can be owned, controlled, or held forever. The 5 aggregates are the Buddha's way of breaking down the human experience into simple, observable parts. Rather than seeing ourselves as one solid, permanent self, he invited us to see that what we call me is actually a collection of changing processes. Each aggregate is like a stream, constantly moving, never exactly the same from one moment to the next. When we look at life this way, the idea of a fixed self begins to lose its grip, and we start to understand why clinging to it leads to frustration and pain. The first aggregate is form, which includes the physical body and all material elements. This is what we usually think of as me in the most obvious way: our face, our hands, our height, our weight, our health. But the Buddha pointed out that this body is constantly changing from birth to death, influenced by age, environment, food, and illness. No matter how much we care for it, it will eventually weaken and break down. When we attach our identity to something that is always changing, we set ourselves up for disappointment. The second aggregate is feeling. This refers not to emotions in the modern sense, but to the basic tone of experience: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every moment of contact with the world gives rise to one of these tones. Eating a delicious meal feels pleasant. Hearing an insult feels unpleasant. Sitting quietly in a room might feel neutral. These feelings arise automatically, but they are not permanent, and they do not define who we are. The third aggregate is perception, the mental function that recognizes and labels things. When we see a shape and color, perception identifies it as a tree, a chair, or a friend. Perception organizes the raw data from our senses into something meaningful. It is essential for functioning in the world, but it can also be deceptive, because it tends to categorize based on memory and habit, not necessarily on reality as it is. The fourth aggregate is mental formations. This is a broad category that includes our intentions, decisions, desires, habits, and emotional patterns. It is the part of the mind that moves us to act, speak, and think in certain ways. It's also where our personality traits and conditioned responses live. These are shaped by past experiences and choices, and in turn they shape our future. Like the other aggregates, mental formations are in constant flux. The fifth aggregate is consciousness, the awareness of an object through the senses. This is not some eternal witness, but a moment-to-moment knowing that arises whenever there is contact between a sense organ and its object. Seeing consciousness, hearing consciousness, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking consciousness each lasts only for a moment before giving way to the next. Together, these five aggregates make up the entire field of our experience. There is nothing about a human being that exists outside of them. When we examine them closely, we see that they are all impermanent, all changing, and none of them can be truly owned or controlled. This is the starting point for understanding why the Buddha said that the five aggregates are suffering, and why letting go of clinging to them is the key to freedom. The Buddha's statement that the five aggregates are suffering is not a pessimistic view of life, but an honest observation of how things work. To understand this, we have to look closely at how each aggregate behaves in our daily experience. At the core of his teaching is the insight that anything impermanent, subject to change, and beyond our ultimate control cannot be a reliable source of lasting satisfaction. And because all five aggregates share these qualities, they inevitably bring a kind of tension, unease, or dissatisfaction whether we notice it or not. Take the aggregate of form, our body, and the physical world we interact with. No matter how much we care for our health, eat well, or exercise, the body is in a constant process of aging and change. We may enjoy its strength and vitality in youth, but these qualities will fade. Illness can strike without warning. Accidents can happen in an instant, and eventually death is unavoidable. When our identity is tied to this fragile form, we live in fear of its loss. This underlying anxiety is part of the suffering the Buddha pointed out. The aggregate of feeling might seem like a more promising source of happiness, because pleasant feelings can be so delightful. But the problem is that no feeling, pleasant or unpleasant, stays the same for long. Pleasant feelings inevitably pass, leaving a desire to recreate them. This craving can become a cycle of constant seeking, never fully satisfied. Unpleasant feelings bring resistance and aversion, which only intensify our discomfort. Even neutral feelings can lead to boredom or a sense of emptiness when we cling to stimulation. In this way, feelings themselves, when clung to, become a source of dissatisfaction. Perception, the third aggregate, allows us to navigate the world by recognizing and naming what we encounter. But perception is shaped by memory, conditioning, and mental bias, which means it is not always accurate. We often perceive things in ways that reinforce our desires or fears rather than reflect reality. Misperceptions can lead to misunderstandings, conflicts, and disappointment. And because perceptions change with new experiences and information, the way we see the world and ourselves is never truly stable. If we cling to our current perception of who we are or what life is, we will suffer when it inevitably shifts. Mental formations, the fourth aggregate, include our thoughts, intentions, habits, and emotional patterns. These are deeply influenced by our past actions and the environments we've been in. While we may feel that we are in control of them, in reality, they arise due to causes and conditions, many of which are outside our control. A sudden memory can trigger anger. A familiar smell can bring joy. We may intend to be kind, yet find ourselves speaking harshly when provoked. This unpredictability and the constant shifting of mental states means that relying on them for stability or identity will eventually cause frustration. The fifth aggregate, consciousness, is perhaps the most subtle. It is the awareness that arises with each moment of sensory contact. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. Consciousness is not a solid, continuous entity. It arises and passes away moment by moment. We often imagine there is a single, unchanging observer within us, but in reality, consciousness is more like a flickering light, with each moment conditioned by what came before. Clinging to the idea of an enduring awareness as self leads to confusion when we realize it is constantly shifting. What ties all of this together is the principle of impermanence. Each aggregate is in constant motion, never the same from one moment to the next. This mismatch between reality and our expectations is the essence of suffering. It's not that the aggregates are inherently bad, they are simply not capable of providing the lasting happiness we seek when we cling to them as me or mine. Another way to understand this is through the lens of control. If something truly belonged to us in an ultimate sense, we could command it to be exactly as we wish. But can we tell the body not to age? Can we order pleasant feelings to stay forever? Can we demand that our thoughts and emotions only be peaceful and joyful? The truth is, no matter how much effort we make, these processes move according to their own nature. Seeing this clearly is not meant to cause despair, but to free us from the exhausting struggle of trying to control what cannot be controlled. This is why the Buddha described the five aggregates as suffering, not because they are punishments or flaws, but because clinging to them as self sets us up for disappointment, fear, and craving. When we release the grip of attachment, we can still experience the body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, and awareness, but without the burden of trying to make them into something they can never be. In that letting go, a deeper peace becomes possible, one that does not depend on the changing tides of life. One of the deepest habits of the human mind is the tendency to cling, to hold on tightly to experiences, objects, and even to our own ideas of who we are. In the Buddha's teaching, clinging is the bridge between the five aggregates and the experience of suffering. It is not the mere existence of the aggregates that causes trouble. It is the way we attach to them and identify with them as I and mine that creates the tension and dissatisfaction we feel. This identification happens so quickly and so subtly that most of the time we don't even notice it. When we feel physical pain, we immediately think, I am hurting. When a pleasant feeling arises, we say, I am happy. When a memory appears in the mind, we take it as proof of who we are. Each of these reactions is a form of clinging, tying our sense of self to something that will not last. The Buddha described four main kinds of clinging: clinging to sense pleasures, clinging to views, clinging to rules and rituals, and clinging to self-view. Clinging to sense pleasures is perhaps the easiest to recognize. It is the attachment to sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and mental experiences that feel pleasant. We naturally want to repeat what feels good and avoid what feels bad. But because pleasant experiences fade and unpleasant ones arise inevitably, this form of clinging leads us into constant chasing and resisting. Clinging to views is more subtle. It is the attachment to opinions, beliefs, and fixed ideas about how things should be. When we hold tightly to a particular worldview, we can feel threatened or angry when it is challenged, and this mental rigidity closes us off from seeing things as they really are. Clinging to rules and rituals refers to the belief that simply following certain external forms, without genuine understanding, will guarantee freedom or salvation. While ethical conduct and mindful practice are vital, turning them into mechanical habits or superstitious routines can become another way the ego hides from deeper change. Finally, clinging to self-view is the most fundamental and pervasive form. It is the deep-seated belief that there is a solid, unchanging me that owns and controls the aggregates. This is the clinging that the teaching on the five aggregates aims to dismantle, because it is the root from which the others grow. When we identify with any of the aggregates, we create a fragile foundation for our happiness. If we think, I am my body, then any sign of aging, illness, or weakness becomes a personal threat. If we think, I am my feelings, then we are tossed about by every emotional high and low. If we think, I am my thoughts and memories, then forgetting something or changing our mind can feel like losing ourselves. This identification binds us to the endless cycle of striving and defending, always trying to secure what cannot be secured. The path to freedom is not about destroying the aggregates or suppressing our experiences. It is about changing our relationship to them. Instead of clinging and identifying, we can learn to observe them as natural processes, arising and passing according to causes and conditions. We can enjoy pleasant experiences without needing them to last forever, face unpleasant ones without being overwhelmed, and meet neutral moments without boredom. When the grip of identification loosens, the aggregates continue to function, but they no longer define who we are. This is the beginning of a profound shift, from living as a fragile self that must constantly be protected, to living as a free and open awareness that moves with the changing flow of life without fear. Freedom, in the way the Buddha described it, is not about escaping life or running away from problems. It is about seeing life so clearly that the roots of suffering lose their power over us. This kind of freedom does not come from believing in a set of ideas, but from insight, a direct, experiential understanding of how things truly are. When it comes to the five aggregates, insight means seeing their nature clearly. They arise and pass away according to causes and conditions. They are impermanent, they cannot be completely controlled, and they are not who we really are. This is not something we simply tell ourselves once and then move on. It is something we return to again and again until it sinks deep into our way of seeing. The Buddha offered a very practical approach to developing this insight. He encouraged people to turn their attention inward and observe their own experience moment by moment. We can start with the body, noticing its movements, postures, and sensations. Rather than thinking, this is my body, we can simply recognize, here is the experience of form. We can do the same with feelings, noticing when they are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, without immediately reacting to hold on or push away. With perceptions, we can notice how the mind labels and categorizes things, sometimes accurately, sometimes with bias. With mental formations, we can see intentions, habits, and emotional states arise and change. And with consciousness, we can observe the simple awareness that comes and goes as each sense contact occurs. By watching in this way, we begin to notice patterns. We see that nothing stays. A pleasant feeling from a good meal fades. A thought we were sure about yesterday seems less certain today. A mood that felt permanent dissolves without warning. At first, this might feel unsettling because it challenges the idea of a solid self. But over time, it becomes liberating. If no single part of our experience can define us, then we are not limited by them. We can still experience joy, but we don't need to cling to it. We can still feel pain, but we don't have to make it into a personal wound that defines our identity. This kind of insight grows stronger with consistent mindfulness. Mindfulness is the simple yet powerful practice of paying attention to what is happening right now, without judgment and without distraction. It is not about forcing the mind to be blank, but about being aware of whatever arises. The warmth of the sun on your skin, the sound of a bird, the tightness in your chest when you're worried, the fleeting pleasure of a compliment. When we bring mindfulness to the five aggregates, we train ourselves to see them as they are, temporary, conditioned processes, not possessions to hold on to. As this understanding deepens, imagine holding a rope tightly because you think it will save you, and then realizing it's only tied to a floating log drifting nowhere. Once you see the truth, your grip loosens on its own. This is what happens with the aggregates. The more we see their impermanence and lack of ownership, the less we struggle to control them. The result of this insight is a profound kind of peace, a peace that does not depend on getting everything we want or avoiding everything we dislike. It is the peace of not being at war with reality. The body will still age, feelings will still change, thoughts will still come and go, but without the constant demand for them to be different. The heart rests. This is the freedom the Buddha spoke of, a freedom found in the middle of ordinary life, born from clear seeing and the gentle release of what was never truly ours to begin with. The teaching of the five aggregates might sound like something to reflect on only during meditation or while reading a book on Buddhism, but in truth it can be applied in the middle of everyday life. It is not meant to be a distant philosophy. It is a tool for meeting real challenges with clarity and balance. Consider the experience of aging. Most people find it painful to watch their bodies change, to lose the strength, appearance, or abilities they once had. But when we remember that the body is just one of the aggregates, a process in constant motion, we begin to see these changes as natural, not as personal failures. The lines on our face and the stiffness in our joints are no longer insults to our identity. They are simply signs that form is following its nature. Loss and grief are another part of life where this teaching becomes powerful. When someone we love passes away, the pain can feel overwhelming because we are clinging to the perception, the feelings, the shared moments that made up our connection with them. Recognizing that all aggregates, in ourselves and in others, are impermanent helps us honor the love we felt without being crushed by its inevitable change. We do not deny our grief, but we hold it with the understanding that change is the very nature of life. Even in the realm of emotions and thoughts, this perspective can transform how we live. When anxiety arises, instead of saying, "I am anxious," and making it part of our identity, we can simply notice, here is the feeling of anxiety, part of the aggregate of mental formations. This shift creates space between us and the experience, allowing it to pass without dragging us into a spiral. Applying this in daily life means that every situation, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, becomes an opportunity to see the truth of impermanence, non-ownership, and change. We can enjoy what is good without fearing its end, endure what is hard without believing it will last forever, and meet what is neutral without boredom. Slowly, life stops feeling like a constant battle to secure happiness and avoid loss, and starts to feel like a flowing river that we can move with gracefully, no matter how it bends and turns. The teaching of the five aggregates is not meant to give us another set of concepts to store in the mind. It is an invitation to look deeply into the way life actually works. Every moment, these aggregates are arising and passing away, creating the experience we call me and my life. But when we look closely, we see that there is no permanent core, no solid self holding it all together. There are only processes, form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, flowing and changing like clouds in the sky. Understanding this does not make us cold or detached from life. In fact, it opens the heart. When we stop clinging to the idea of a fixed self, we also stop clinging so tightly to the idea of others as fixed. We can see that they too are a stream of changing experiences, just like us. This brings compassion, because we realize that everyone is subject to the same impermanence, the same vulnerability, and the same search for happiness. This teaching also frees us from the exhausting task of trying to control everything. If the aggregates are not truly ours to own, then their changes are not failures on our part. The body will grow older whether we approve or not. Feelings will shift whether we fight them or not. Thoughts will come and go whether we invite them or not. Seeing this clearly allows us to rest in a kind of peace that is not dependent on the world bending to our will. So the call to reflection is simple. Begin noticing. Notice your body as it moves and rests. Notice feelings as they rise and fade. Notice how the mind names things and creates stories. Notice intentions, moods, and the awareness that holds it all. Don't rush to judge or change anything. Just watch. The more you watch, the more you will see the truth the Buddha pointed to, that freedom is not somewhere far away, but right here, in the clear and gentle letting go of what was never yours to begin with. This is the path of insight. This is the path of freedom. And it begins now, in this very breath, in this very moment.